I am City Council President JP Morrell, and I'm running for re-election to New Orleans City Council at large Division 2. I felt like I accomplished quite a bit last term. We did confirmation of mayoral appointees. We created the New Orleans City Council Cultural and Rec Fund. We brought more transparency to government, but in particular, when it comes to the budget, there are a lot of aspects of the budget that are not transparent. In particular, the budget we pass every year is not set in stone, so to speak. It's more of a giant suggestion to the executive branch. And I want to make our budget mirror the state budget or the federal budget, in that the budget we pass in October and throughout from October through December with public input is actually the budget, and that if an administration wants to change and move around priorities in the budget, they have to come back to a public hearing to tell the public why the money's being moved. Because right now, once we pass the budget, money can be moved around quite easily with no council input, no public input, and all we see is the things we thought were going to happen in the budget in December never happen. And that's something that has to change, and it's going to require a charter revision.
What do you think is the number one issue facing New Orleans, and how can the city council meaningfully address that issue?
Well, I think affordability is a huge issue. The work we're doing on utilities to harden the grid and to create more opportunities for solar innovation, for virtual power plants. We've already done net metering. We've already done the digital legislation that's going through the docket right now, virtual power plants. We have to generate more power locally to offset buying power off the grid. That is a huge issue. The affordability as far as it comes to fees and prices the city does, that needs to be curtailed. And more importantly, we need to go at all of the entities that are currently not paying any taxes for drainage. Drainage is an existential threat to the city. If we continue to flood, we will not be successful. And anywhere from 35 to 45% of properties owned in this parish pay no property tax, so they don't contribute towards sewage and water board. We're going to have to investigate, as we've been doing for the last couple of years, figure out a way to tax them in a way that does not put additional taxes on those who are already paying taxes for sewage and water board. Is that a drainage fee? Possibly, but you can't have a drainage fee with the millage. I don't believe in double taxing a resident to make two lane pay something. So if we're gonna move toward a drainage fee, we have to get rid of the millage, or we have to allow a credit for the millage to offset the drainage fees cost, because it's simply too expensive to live here. And we need to be very cognizant in everything we do that we're not increasing the cost of living for residents that are in this parish.
This is the next question, and so it will sound a little redundant. Our water utility is also a source of frequent complaints, particularly when it relates to drainage. Does the city need a stormwater fee to pay for drainage infrastructure? Why or why not?
There certainly needs to be a mechanism for the city to collect taxes from the nonprofits and state entities that don't pay any taxes. That can be anywhere from 35 to 40% of property owners in the city. The challenge that has existed since the drainage fee discussion started was that the original idea was to add a drainage fee and just add a drainage fee. If you add a drainage fee without accounting for people who are currently paying property tax, you're double taxing them to get to the nonprofits. The two solutions to that, the first one would be to pass a drainage fee and then zero out the millage. That is the easiest thing to do. It is the thing that makes the sewage and water board the most nervous, because the property tax comes out top of the year, they can count on that money. A drainage fee, if someone doesn't pay the drainage fee, then, or that fee is delayed, it can affect their operations. Another idea, which I think is more palatable, would be to give a credit on your millage against the drainage fee, which in most cases would wipe out the drainage fee. There are some legal issues with that. And I think resolving those legal issues is why we haven't even put a drainage fee up for a vote yet, because until you can figure out how to get to those large nonprofit property owners without additionally taxing regular residents and businesses, it's a non-starter. So I do think we have to change the taxation structure in some significant way, but we cannot double tax people who are currently paying taxes to get to those who are paying nothing.
New Orleans residents have a lot of complaints about utilities, from rising bills to frequent outages. How will you approach regulating energy and Delta utilities?
Well, I mean, the first thing that we have to do is deal with reliability. When you look at your outages, the reason why, under the city council as chair of utilities, the reason why we publish outages and their reasons is not just to shame Entergy, is to create a public record of when those outages are because of reliability and when those outages are because of environment. Like a Mylar balloon knocking out a power line, that's a human error kind of citizen problem. But when a light and actuator goes out, when a pole falls over, that is a reliability problem that you are already paying for in your current energy bill. So we have a reliability docket open, and we are pursuing potential fines and efforts to figure out why Entergy is not collecting a proper inventory of all of their equipment to replace it before it fails, because that is something they have to do. Now, when it comes to the cost of energy, there is two lines of thought. First, I know that there are people who have said we should wipe out all arrearages. That is not legally possible. If the city council could wipe out arrearages by making a private company eat debt, every council would do it and be the most popular council on earth. The reality is that when we receive fees or we receive settlements from Entergy, we can do two things with it. The first is to do rate credits on your bill. The second is to reinvest in the system. What this council has done is really pursue reinvestment and expanding things like solar, like virtual power plants, like community lighthouses, because those are the things that will actually lower your bill. If we were to just give rebates, which is something other utilities do, that is a one-time fee that fixes an old bill but doesn't actually lower cost. The Louisiana Public Service Commission did a $75 million rebate over 3 years. They have 1 million customers, so the rough math puts it down to about $75 per customer over 3 years. You get $2 on your bill if you're a Public Service Commission person. They also then passed a $2 billion investment on resilience and passed that on to ratepayers, which is $8 for 25 to 40 years. That is a net bill increase, even with the credit. What the council did is when we got our settlement for Grand Gulf, we reinvested into resilience, not reliability, because reliability is already Entergy's, but resilience to make our grid hardened against climate change. We paid that up front, which means that though we're doing resilience projects like the Public Service Commission, your bill didn't go up at all because we paid for it and didn't let Entergy finance it. We're also using that money to expand solar farms at St. Mary's, Abramson, and Gordon Plaza. So those are things that will actually lower your bill over time in a definitive way rather than a one-time cost. So the council is very cognizant of the forces that are at play nationally to make these for-profit corporations even more profit. And we're finding out ways locally that observe and acknowledge climate change is real to lower your price permanently rather than Band-Aids.
We may be dealing with a very different fiscal reality in the coming years. There is no longer an influx of American Rescue Plan Act dollars. Federal funding for certain public health, climate resiliency, and disaster recovery projects is not necessarily guaranteed. Still, the City Council will steward a budget of well over $1 billion. How should the council decide what to prioritize of that budget?
Well, I want to begin by saying, and this is on the record, when I came on the council in 2022, the first thing I highlighted on the record was that the Cantrell administration was doing Jindal math. And I call it Jindal math because under Governor Bobby Jindal, he based the budget off of Katrina money that was not reoccurring money, that was one-time money, and they used the excuse of that Katrina money, that non-reoccurring money, to inflate the budget, which led to the crash to the state level when I was a state legislator. When I came in 2022, I saw the same problem, which was that they had spread out American Rescue Plan money for 3 years through last year to balance the budget, and they treated it as reoccurring money. So I was the least person surprised when we started having a budget shortfall because I saw that it was a potential issue. I do think the reality is that we are going to have less money. I think that we're going to have to be very aggressive at the state level, working the legislature, as this administration, and really the Landrieu administration didn't do, to get our fair share of capital monies at the state level to do capital investment. We are a large metropolitan city, and we get a fraction of the money Jefferson Parish, Baton Rouge, and Shreveport and Lafayette get as far as state infrastructure investment. And that's because we, as a government, have not been as bullish as other governments in doing so. So that's one thing I would do to help do that offset. The other issue is as far as prioritization. I think something the council did very effectively was advocate for the Housing Trust Fund to set aside a portion of our budget toward housing. Housing and affordability are the number one issues in the city that are facing people as existential threats to living in the city of New Orleans. We're going to have to figure out ways to streamline government, to make government less expensive, to make living here less expensive, and to promote better quality of life outcomes for the people who can afford to live here. Then we have to figure out ways to make it a more affordable to live here. The other tremendous burden on people is homeowners insurance. Now, that is not something the city council can resolve. It is certainly a state and federal issue, but we have to be much, much more aggressive in advocating at the state and federal level, because I know too many people that have left the southern part of Louisiana over homeowners insurance, even when everything else works. So these are the issues that are facing us. These are the priorities for the city, trying to figure out how to make it more affordable to live here, how to improve quality of life, and how to streamline government, because it has grown way too large. We have 10 times the spend with less population. That doesn't numerically make sense. And like I said, having the budget much more transparent and in a way that the public and the council can track will help us find out where we can potentially save money and reinvest to make up for the federal funds that are lost.
A huge part of the council agenda every meeting is land use and zoning.
Yes.
How will you approach those decisions? What considerations do you think should be prioritized, and how should affordability factor into these decisions?
Well, I think land use is primarily one of the biggest issues that faces the New Orleans City Council. I know that it's not the sexiest issue that we have, but it's one of the primary issues that councils exist. I think that when I look at zoning issues, my first deference is the district council members, because they are dealing with specific neighborhoods on a day-to-day basis. But beyond that, I really listen to neighborhoods. I think that part of the conflict we've had over the last couple of years, even coming on the council, is you've had too many third-party organizations that want to dictate how people can develop their homes. Now, by that, I don't mean necessarily VC Pora, HDLC, View Carre Commission. What I mean is something we've seen in the last couple of years is second and third shadow neighborhood organizations popping up out of the woodwork to try and determine how property should be developed. Most recently, just yesterday, we had a older couple that was trying to demolish a home that was obviously about to fall on another home. This neighborhood organization that no one ever heard of began lobbying the council to block this older couple who had lived in the Treme for years from doing that. It turns out that these are people who just moved in to Treme, that were all investors in the Treme. And there was this issue after Katrina where you saw a lot of people targeting damaged or dilapidated houses with onerous amounts of complaints, not because they were good-natured neighbors, but because they were trying to get the property to go to sheriff's sale so they could buy it. And what became very evident to me in the situation is when I talked to all the neighbors around the house, they supported the couple, but this organization that no one had heard of was trying desperately to block them from using their own property the way they saw fit. I think that's what's going to happen, is that as a council, we need to prioritize affordability is always number one, but two, when it comes to a property and how it's going to be dealt with, listen to the owner, listen to the neighbors. If they are in agreement that this is what's best for the neighborhood, why would we ever let third-party organizations override that without some clear and convincing evidence? It's one thing if someone's going to tear down a perfectly functional California bungalow that could be rehabilitated, but if a building is collapsing in on itself and no one reasonably believes it can be resuscitated, why would we force neighbors to deal with that dilapidated property because some investor in a year and a half might get it at a sheriff's sale?
What do you think is something that an average voter might misunderstand about the city council, or what do you wish voters knew about the job?
I wish voters really understood energy regulation, utility regulation. The thing to remember is that our regulatory authority of all of our utilities actually comes from Congress. And when you hear about dockets on the council agenda, they're legal dockets. And by that, I mean that whenever energy wants to change something or wherever the council wants to find them, it's like mini trials. And the reason why they're so lengthy and so complicated is because either party, usually energy, can appeal anything we do to civil district court and go through the court process to make us do things. So like when there's a rate case where energy wants to do a rate increase, the council's number one job is to fight the rate increase. That's what the council utility regular office does. That's what our advisors do. They fight the rate increase. However, because of federal law and FERC common law that deals with the issue, there are very few cases where a utility cannot get any increase. So the fight is over how high it's going to be. When people say you shouldn't give energy a rate increase, that's certainly an option. The council could say no rate increase. Then energy would take their docket, they would go to civil district court, and they would get that giant rate increase because we didn't make the case why they shouldn't. So it's very complicated. It is an entire legal body of law on every regulatory aspect of energy, whether it could sell off gas. All of that are legal questions that we have to fight in the docket. And ultimately, if we don't make the case as to why they can or can't do something, we are not the final decision maker, the courts are. And if it's a small thing like a rate increase, it goes through the state court system. Now remember, district court local, appellate court not so local, Supreme Court, one New Orleans person, 6 non-New Orleans people that are all Republicans who are elected judges that energy can donate to. So the thing we try to avoid always is having a case that goes to the Supreme Court because we'll lose. With FERC, with the massive settlement we got regarding Grand Gulf, we were very lucky in that the council negotiated an aggressive, massive settlement before Donald Trump became president, because FERC is a federal agency the president points to. If we lose a FERC case locally and have to go to FERC in DC against energy or any utility, we will lose because Donald Trump is currently restructuring it. These are the different powers at play. In utility regulation, it's not as simple as people think. When I hear people say, make energy forgive arrearages, we cannot legally do that. What will happen is if we tell energy, forgive the arrearages, they will wipe the arrearages, take that money and put it on the bills of every ratepayer who's currently paying their bill. That's how you forgive arrearages. Other than that, we don't have the jurisdiction or the ability to do it. It's very frustrating when I hear candidates prey upon people's ignorance to promise things they know they can't deliver to get your vote. It would be very easy for me as the utility regulator to say I can do things I can't do to trick you into a vote, and I'm just not going to do that.
What is something surprising that most voters wouldn't know about you?
I would have said comic books, but everyone does know that about me. Honestly, I am a voracious reader. I read probably a book every day or two. I've been a speed reader since law school, and I try to always fill the gaps I have in knowledge and development. There is a wonderful book I'm reading right now by an author named Jerusalem on federal housing and how we deal with housing requirements at the federal level and state level, just because I'm fascinated by how complicated housing is. And I think it's a problem that's solvable, but it's complicated. And I think that for most people, when they see a complicated issue, they tend to walk away from it because it's very hard. And in my time on the council, I've tried my hardest to try and tackle complicated issues that are very controversial. It's kind of why I get in fights all the time, because people, when I'm interacting in government, I am often faced with people who tell me a problem is not fixable. And I think every problem is fixable as long as you're willing to understand the problem and make hard decisions. And what I've found from the state level to the local level is most politicians and bureaucrats do not want to make hard decisions. And I'm here to make hard decisions.
I think probably have a very similar motivation as a journalist.
Yeah.
The belief that complicated things actually can be understood and solved. Doesn't mean they're not complicated.
No,
but
I mean, housing is tremendously complicated because there is no way in a capitalist society the government will ever produce enough housing to house everyone. So you have to constantly balance the market forces that are going back and forth with it. And you have to figure out ways the government can be helpful without subsidizing profit in a way that hurts people. I mean, American Can is the cautionary tale to every council person, which is a council gave tremendous incentives and benefits to a developer at the American Can building in Mid-City for 10-year affordable housing, and literally on the day after the 10th year was up, they evicted everyone out the building. That is the cautionary tale for when you try to find an easy solution. There is no easy solution. You have to figure out ways that we can change government or change how we do government in a solvable way. All these charter amendments we've done, whether it's confirmation, whether it's changing how the budget is, giving the council and the public more time to look at the budget, those are problems that have been around for decades, but we knew the only way to solve the problem in a definitive way that would last beyond when I'm no longer on the council is potentially changing the charter. I could have probably gotten the mayor to agree to let us review her appointees, but that doesn't solve the problem of making sure only qualified people that the public signs off on become appointed. That is a hard problem that required a hard solution, and it was a lot of conflict, but the problem is fixed now. Now there is no person who will head safety and permits and be in charge of short-term rental regulation that will have been a former Airbnb executive, which is something we saw this term.
just even rewind a bit. I know you said it wouldn't surprise voters, but where did the love of superheroes and comic books come from?
Honestly, so everyone knows I love superheroes. When I do, in my office, there's a picture of a great portrait by Reggie Art of a Captain America and a shield. And I'll just talk about Captain America, for example. This is kind of, it encapsulates all comic books. If you understand the background of Captain America was created by Jack Kirby and Stan Lee before America entered World War II. And he was created by one Jewish guy, one half Jewish guy, to fight Hitler before fighting Hitler was popular. And what's funny is that when Captain America was punching Hitler, we all think, of course, Captain America's punching Hitler. Since we hadn't entered the war yet, everyone in New York was pretty much Nazi sympathizers, and they got death threats constantly to the point the mayor of New York had to give them police protection. Now, once America entered the war, Captain America was elevated, but Captain America was never a person who was meant to be this Uncle Sam, patriotic, recruit you for the military guy. He was meant to represent the American spirit of fighting for the right thing, even when it's not popular. And if you look at Captain America through time, Stan Lee and Marvel have done a great job of keeping that vein, to the point where when Ta-Nehisi Coates was writing Captain America, a lot of it was wrapped in with the Black Lives Matter and the government and overreach. And there was this line Captain America had when he was talking to General Thunderbolt Ross, where General Thunderbolt Ross told Captain America, be a good soldier and stand down. And Captain America told General Ross, I will stand down when Washington stands up. And if you look at Captain America as a character throughout time, he has always been the person who makes the hard decision. When Civil War and everything happened, the easy thing is to do what the government wanted. Captain America always picked the hard, right thing because he believed in the promise of America and the people that live here. So I know people see the shield behind me and think I'm just being a goofy Marvel person. Really, it's there to remind me that doing the right thing is making the hard decision almost every time. And doing the right thing is knowing people won't even understand you're making the hard decision. But you have to really trust that as a student of history, history will show I made the right decision. I mean, I'm the only no vote on surveillance right now. I'm the only council person that said more surveillance is bad. That is not an easy decision. The people out there who are scared, who believe that surveillance is the solution to all of our crime problems, It's not. And it will be very easy to hide in the crowd and say, more cameras mean you'll be safer. It's not. What more cameras mean is that the federal government and private companies can spy on you easier. And doing the right thing is publicly saying that's a bad idea. So that's why I could go in depth with X-Men and Black Panther and everything else, but they all have a vein of subversion to what society expects of people and really becoming almost like a modern day ongoing Aesop fable of like making society look at itself.
I really enjoyed when Ta-Nehisi Coates spoke, just to think a week or two after the election in 2024.
I was there. It was his really like his commentary, especially kind of on giving people grace for not voting because they're in protest, because they didn't understand the stakes. I think sometimes he says things, and one thing in particular, he said at that Xavier thing, he said that you have to give people grace because they're not like black people. We know we always have to vote for the best possible candidate because we're never given the ideal candidate. And for a lot of people, they haven't learned yet that sometimes protesting because you don't have the candidate you want has consequences. And like, it was not a tacit endorsement of Kamala Harris, but it was more like black people have been compromising who they want to vote for since the 60s. It's just, if you have two choices and one is not great and one's bad, it's still important to vote. Not voting is a choice, but it's almost always a bad choice.
What do you hope to accomplish with your second term that you were unable to accomplish in your first term?
Well, first, I passed a lot of ordinances in my first term that are currently under legal challenge, largely because the mayor encouraged people to challenge the law. Two examples of that are the council oversight over contracts over $1 million and multi-year contracts to bring more transparency. The other is the sanitation contracts. They're multi-year, almost $100 million contracts that before we passed the law, mayors could sign unilaterally and the public would have no say on them. I want to do more of that. I want to do more transparency in contracting and spending because this deficit, if we dig into the weeds, we're going to find out there's a lot of contracting that was unnecessary, that was done behind closed doors, that spent a lot of money that we didn't have. I think that the public having more insight into how we spend money means that you have to justify spending the money. So I want to have more transparency in the budget process. I want to have more council oversight and public oversight over how the budget has changed over the year. And when it comes to utilities, I really want to fully have the city embrace a future where we are developing renewables locally, because the nature of how transmission lines are set up throughout the country, we are a load pocket at the end of a transmission line. It is the reason why our power is so expensive, because we have limited ways of receiving power, and because we're competing with Michigan, Kentucky, and Florida for power on the market, the cost is always high. Can we build more transmission infrastructure with MISO to have better access to power? Sure. That's going to take 5 to 15 years. We can do more locally with virtual power plants, with massive solar development to lower the cost, not just lower the cost locally, but insulate ourselves from brownouts like what happened with MISO this past summer. If we develop the technology and we develop the investment locally, which we're doing right now, partially with the money we got from the Grand Gulf settlement, then we can insulate costs and protect us from climate change. I want to have New Orleans as solar as possible in the next term, because solar power is the most reliable. It is the least experimental way of us generating power locally to offset cost, and we cannot count on the rest of Louisiana to do that. We already have to deal with the fact that the rest of Louisiana approved the Meta plant, which we had no say in because we're not in Energy Louisiana's network, we're in our own network. But we need to do everything possible to mitigate what's going to happen with that Meta power plant, because it is going to cause brownouts, it is going to cause problems. And if we have the power locally to protect ourselves, we can look out for ourselves, because the rest of the state's not going to look out for us.
Some individuals and groups in the city, including your opponent, Pastor Manning, have been critical of you, saying that you've shut certain individuals or groups out of meetings because they've been publicly critical of you. Do you think council members have an obligation to meet with all their constituents, even the ones who maybe have insulted them online?
I meet with everyone who requests a meeting, and I've met with plenty of people who have had not positive things to say about me. I think some people conflate that with if you demand a meeting on a certain day and I can't meet on that certain day, that is not me saying I will never meet with you. That's saying that meeting time won't work. So I hear that as a criticism. I would say that there's political motivation during an election season in making certain criticisms. And I can tell you, for example, I've met with the Alliance for Affordable Energy on numerous occasions, despite the fact that their person who is the head of their IGR attacks me on a regular basis. I think it's important for everybody to face their critics. That's just the way being elected is. I mean, unlike most elected officials, I don't block people on social media. I may not let them comment on certain things because some of their commentary is less political and more personal, particularly when it affects my family. And I think my family deserves to have some level of privacy and to protect their mental health. But everyone can see everything I'm doing at all times. And I am probably, I would argue, I'm probably one of the most transparent and available council members ever.